It was one of those heavy summer afternoons when the air felt thick enough to hold a memory. I remember the shimmer of heat rising off the asphalt as I pulled up to the Callahan's driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my shoes. I hadn't been there in months. My best friend, Noah, and I hadn't talked much since he'd gone off for his summer internship. Still, I figured showing up unannounced might earn me a laugh and a cold drink. But it wasn't Noah who opened the door. Mr. Callahan stood there instead. Sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with dirt, a faint trace of sweat on his temple. He looked surprised for a moment, then smiled that soft, unreadable smile adults use when they're trying to guess whether you've grown up yet. "Hey, it's been a while," he said. His voice was calm, low, carrying the same authority it always had when he'd picked us up from school years ago. "Noah's on his way back. Come in. He won't be long." The house smelled of cedar polish and summer air. I stepped inside, the floor cool beneath my sneakers. He closed the door gently behind me, and for some reason the click echoed louder than it should have. "Still keeping busy?" he asked, leading me through to the kitchen. "Trying to," I said. "Work classes. You know." He nodded, setting a glass down on the counter, filling it with ice and amber tea. "You look different. Older." I laughed, a little awkwardly. "That's what happens after sophomore year." He smiled again, not with amusement exactly, but something closer to fondness. "You used to come around all the time. Miss those days." I took a sip of the tea. It was cold, sweet, almost too strong. Outside, the rhythmic hiss of the sprinklers played like background music. For a moment, everything felt perfectly ordinary. But then I noticed his gaze linger just a fraction too long. Not uncomfortable yet, just enough for me to feel the weight of being seen. He caught himself and looked away, clearing his throat. I was out in the yard, trying to get the garden back in shape. Been neglecting it. I followed his glance out the window. The yard was wide and sunlit, dotted with patches of wildflowers he'd once planted for his ex-wife. I remembered her vaguely, always in motion, always smiling, before she'd left a few years back. He noticed my hesitation and gave a small, almost self-mocking shrug. "Divorced men and gardens. It's a tragic combination." I smiled politely, unsure what to say. There was an undercurrent to his words that wasn't exactly sadness but something lonelier. "Can I give you a hand?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. He shook his head, then reconsidered. "You sure? It's hot out there." "I don't mind." He studied me for a second, eyes narrowing slightly in the sunlight spilling through the window. "You really haven't changed much." Still eager to help. The compliment, if it was one, landed somewhere between kind and personal. We stepped outside, the heat wrapping around us like a blanket. The air smelled of earth and cut grass. Bees drifted lazily over the flower beds. I followed him down the stone steps to where bags of soil leaned against the fence. "Just need to turn the soil and replant a few things," he said, handing me a pair of gloves. His fingers brushed mine, brief and firm. We worked side by side for a while, the silence filled with the rustle of leaves and the low hum of distant traffic. He asked about my parents, my plans for the next semester, the kind of questions that sounded casual but carried real curiosity. He listened intently, nodding as I spoke, occasionally offering small pieces of advice. There was something steady about him, a stillness I hadn't noticed before, the kind that comes from living through enough loss to stop pretending everything's fine. At one point, I bent to move a bag, and he reached out instinctively, a hand on my shoulder to steady me. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't entirely accidental either. The brief touch sent a ripple through me. Quick, confusing, unspoken. He pulled back almost immediately, muttering, "Sorry. Didn't want you to strain your back." "It's fine," I said, though my voice didn't sound like my own. For a moment neither of us spoke. The sprinkler turned, spraying a fine mist across the garden. Droplets clung to his arm hair, catching sunlight like dust. I looked away, pretending to focus on the soil. "Your generation doesn't garden much," he said after a while, tone light again. "Everything's digital now. No patience for dirt." "Guess I'm old-fashioned," I replied. Maybe that's why I like having you around. The words slipped out of him casually, but they landed differently. There was no flirtation in his voice, yet something inside me stirred. Curiosity, confusion, maybe a quiet recognition I wasn't ready to name. We finished the last patch near the fence, both standing there, sweat damp and dusty. He stretched, exhaling softly. You did good, he said. Better than Noah ever managed. I laughed. You can tell him that yourself when he gets back. He smiled, then looked at his phone briefly. He just texted. Says he's running late. Typical. The moment hung there, a small, delicate shift between expectation and reality. We both knew I could leave, but neither of us mentioned it. He wiped his hands on a towel, eyes meeting mine again. You hungry? I could make something quick. I'm okay, I said, though part of me wanted to stay just to see where the silence might go. The sun dipped lower, painting the porch in gold. He stood there a moment longer, thoughtful, almost hesitant. Then, with that same calm voice that always carried more than it said, he asked, Mind giving me a hand in the yard while you wait? It wasn't really a question, and even if it had been, I already knew my answer. As he walked ahead toward the toolshed, the light caught his shoulders, broad, confident, but carrying a quiet loneliness I couldn't quite name. The air felt different now, alive with something neither of us would dare speak yet. And as I followed him into the yard again, I realized that sometimes the most dangerous invitations sound perfectly ordinary. The sun had slipped lower by the time we started again, that soft golden hour where everything looks gentler than it really is. The yard had gone quiet except for the occasional whir of cicadas and the slow creak of the wind through the trees. Mr. Callahan handed me a small shovel and a half smile. Let's get these last few bags out of the way before the light goes. You take that side. I'll handle this one. His voice was steady, low, and patient, the kind of voice that made you want to listen even when he wasn't saying much. I set to work, loosening the soil around the flower bed. The ground was dry, almost stubborn, but it gave in with time and pressure. Sweat ran down my back, and my shirt clung in places. He worked beside me, sleeves rolled up higher, forearms streaked with dirt, veins like thin rivers under the skin. We didn't talk much at first, just the sound of shovels and breathing, a rhythm that felt oddly intimate. I found myself matching his pace without meaning to, glancing at him more than I should. When I stopped to lift one of the heavier soil bags, he was there almost immediately. Careful, he said, stepping close. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for the other end. Together, we hoisted it up, muscles straining, shoulders nearly touching. The scent of earth and soap and something faintly woodsy filled the space between us. You've got good form, he said, half teasing. Didn't think you were much for manual labor. Guess you underestimated me. He smiled faintly, eyes crinkling at the corners. Guess I did. We set the bag down near the roses, both exhaling at the same time. The moment lingered, one of those pauses that lasts a beat too long to be casual. Then he nodded toward the next row of plants, and we moved again, wordless but aware. The conversation eventually found its way back, like a creek finding its path after a rockslide. So, he said after a while, his tone lighter, you seeing anyone these days? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, then shrugged. No, not really. But it didn't last. He looked over, something curious in his eyes but not prying. Sorry to hear that. Relationships can be hard at your age. At any age, really. Yeah. I poked at the soil with the shovel, buying time. Guess I'm just not good at pretending things are fine when they're not. He gave a soft, approving hum. That's a good thing. Too many people waste years pretending. The way he said it quietly like he knew made me glance up. Your ex-wife? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't flinch. If anything, his expression softened. Yeah, we tried. For a long time. She was a good woman, but we wanted different lives. She moved to Oregon last year. Met someone else. His voice carried no bitterness, just a calm acceptance that made it sadder somehow. Do you ever miss her? Sometimes, he admitted. Not her exactly. More the idea of her. The noise, the laughter, someone else's voice in the house. He paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Noah's gone most of the time now, so it's just me. A little too quiet around here. There was honesty in that, a kind that made my chest tighten. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He went on, almost absently. Funny thing about loneliness, it's not loud. It just sits there, like an empty chair you forget to put away. We worked in silence for a while after that, the weight of his words hanging between us. I could feel it in the way he moved, slower now, more thoughtful. The air had cooled a little, but the tension hadn't. I reached for the pruning shears to trim a low branch, and as I stepped forward, the handle slipped slightly from my grip. He reached out at the same moment, steadying my hand with his. His palm was rough, warm, and sure. For a second, the world shrank to that touch. The faint rasp of callous skin against mine, the scent of grass and faint cologne, the quick catch of breath I hoped he didn't hear. He looked at me, eyes unreadable. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. It should have been nothing. A simple comment. But something in the way he said it, slow, deliberate, made it sound like more. Cleared my throat. Guess all that gym membership finally paid off. He chuckled quietly, letting go. Maybe so. The laughter faded, replaced by a silence that hummed just beneath the surface. I turned back to the roses, pretending to focus. The air felt heavier, the distance between us smaller. We finished up as the sky turned a soft orange. The yard bathed in fading light. I crouched to gather the tools, brushing dirt off my knees. When I stood, he was behind me, close enough that his shadow crossed mine. "You've grown into a good man," he said suddenly. The words came out almost like a sigh, not a compliment, not even pride. More like a truth that had been waiting to be said. I didn't know how to respond. My heart picked up, and before I could speak, I felt his hand on my back. It was meant to brush away the dirt, maybe, just a small gesture of care. But the movement lingered, his palm gliding lightly across my shoulder blade, pausing near the center of my back. My breath caught. Neither of us moved. His hand hovered there, then slowly withdrew. When I turned, our eyes met. There was no smirk, no apology. Just a look, quiet, searching, almost scared, like he'd shown me something he hadn't meant to. I couldn't find words. I didn't want to break whatever fragile truth was holding us in place. Finally, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's go inside," he said softly. "It's getting hot out here." His voice was steady again, but it carried something different now. Restraint, maybe, or regret. I nodded, setting down the shears. My hands trembled just slightly, though I hoped he didn't notice. As we walked back toward the porch, the light stretched long across the yard, shadows of two figures walking close but not touching. The air smelled like soil and rain, and somewhere inside me, something began to shift. Slow, dangerous, and entirely out of my control. The cool air inside the house hit my skin like a different season. After the heat of the garden, the silence felt almost sacred, thick and motionless, disturbed only by the low hum of the refrigerator. The scent of pine cleaner mingled with something faintly masculine. Soap, dust, and worn leather. Mr. Callahan led the way through the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. Family photos lined the walls, smiling snapshots of years that felt farther away than they should have been. There was Noah at 10 holding a baseball bat, a Christmas morning frozen in time, a wedding photo, younger, sharper versions of people who no longer shared a life. He paused at that one, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured toward the kitchen. "Drink." "Sure." He poured iced tea into 2 glasses, the ice crackling. When he handed mine over, his fingers brushed mine lightly. A simple touch, but after the stillness of the yard, it felt louder than it should. "Thanks," I said, pretending not to notice the flutter in my chest. We moved to the living room. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, slicing the room into golden stripes. He dropped onto the couch with a quiet sigh and motioned for me to sit. I took the armchair at first, too cautious to share the same space, but he smiled. You can sit here, he said, patting the cushion beside him. I don't bite. The words were innocent, but something in his tone carried warmth that made my throat tighten. I sat beside him, leaving just enough distance to pretend it meant nothing. For a while we talked about small things: school, work, the yard. He told stories about when he and Noah had built the old treehouse, about the time a raccoon got trapped in the attic. We laughed, and the laughter felt easy, natural. But laughter has a strange way of giving itself away. It clears the air just long enough for the silence after to mean something more. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick with thought. He stared at his glass, then at me. His expression changed, softer, more searching. You don't need to pretend with me, he said finally. I blinked. Pretend. He looked up. I know. The words hung there. For a moment I didn't breathe. My pulse thudded in my ears as the meaning sank in. He wasn't talking about the garden or the visit. He meant me. My mouth went dry. What do you mean? A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not mocking, not smug, just understanding. You don't have to play dumb, kid. I've known for a while. Noah told me once. Said you never really talked about girls. I felt the heat rise in my neck. Oh. He nodded slowly, gaze steady. It doesn't bother me. Not one bit. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that to me quite like that before. Calmly, without curiosity or judgment. Felt strange, disarming. He took a sip of tea, eyes still on me. I figured you might have thought I judge. But you should know. I'm not exactly one to throw stones. I frowned slightly, unsure. What do you mean? He set the glass down on the coffee table, fingers tracing the rim. His tone dropped lower. I'm not entirely straight either. For a second, the air thinned. He gave a small, self-conscious laugh. Didn't expect to say that today. I stared, unable to hide my surprise. You're bisexual, he said quietly. Always have been. Spent most of my life pretending not to be. The words came out without drama, just honesty. Like he was setting down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. I grew up in a small town, he continued. Back then, you didn't say things like that. You got married, had kids, went to church, kept your head down. And I did all of it. Tried to be the kind of man everyone expected. His eyes drifted toward the family photos on the wall. I loved her in my own way, but part of me was never really there. She knew it eventually. I think she forgave me for it long before the papers were signed. The room felt still, as if even the house was listening. I don't think people realize how lonely it can be, he went on. Living halfway between what you want and what the world says you should want. You start convincing yourself you don't need anyone. He smiled faintly, almost wistful. But the truth is, you do. We all do. I looked down at my hands, unsure what to do with them. There was a quiet ache in his voice that felt familiar, the kind of loneliness that doesn't scream, just hums quietly until someone finally hears it. How long have you been divorced? I asked softly. 3 years now. He exhaled through his nose. She moved away. Noah stayed here with me for a while, then got busy with college, friends. The house, well, it got quiet. He leaned back, shoulders sinking into the couch. You get used to the quiet, but it's not the same as peace. It's just the absence of sound. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. I'd never thought of him as lonely before. He always seemed composed, the kind of man who didn't need anyone. But sitting there in the dim light, I could see it, not weakness but weariness. I guess that's why you garden so much, I said. He chuckled softly. Yeah, plants don't mind silence. They just need care. He turned to me then, eyes soft but serious. I guess people aren't much different. Something about the way he said it made the air between us feel charged again. Gentle but undeniable. My heart picked up, and I forced myself to look away, tracing the condensation sliding down my glass. I didn't mean to make things awkward, he said after a moment. You didn't, I lied. He gave a half smile. You're not very good at lying. I'm trying. He laughed quietly, low and warm. Don't. It doesn't suit you. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. Felt closer. The distance between us had shrunk, not in inches but in understanding. When I finally looked up again, he was watching me. Not with hunger or pity, but something gentler, almost protective. "You remind me," he said, voice soft, "what it feels like to be seen." My throat tightened. "Seen? Yeah." He nodded slowly. "When someone looks at you and doesn't see a label or a job or a mistake, just you. It's rare." The confession hung there, fragile and intimate. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to comfort him. Another part wanted to run. I managed a small, unsteady smile. "That's a nice thing to say." He gave a slow nod, eyes still on me. "It's just true." Outside, thunder murmured faintly in the distance, the promise of rain rolling in from the horizon. The light through the blinds dimmed another shade, and in that hush, I could hear both our breaths. Uneven, uncertain, human. He stood finally, picking up his glass. "I should check the windows before the storm hits." I nodded, setting mine down carefully. My palms were damp against the cool glass. He lingered a moment longer, as if debating whether to say more. Then he gave that same quiet, careful smile. "You did good work out there today. Thanks for helping." "Anytime," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He turned and walked toward the hallway, his steps slow, thoughtful. I stayed where I was, watching the shadows lengthen across the living room floor. Somewhere inside that silence, I knew something had shifted. Not loud enough to name, but impossible to undo. By the time the first thunder rolled in, the house had gone dim. A thin veil of rain shimmered against the windows, the sky bruised gray and violet. The air smelled of wet earth and electricity. I found Mr. Callahan in the hallway, sliding a window shut. "Storm's moving fast," he said, glancing toward the streak of lightning that lit the yard. "Help me with the others before it floods the floor." We moved from room to room, our footsteps softened by the carpet. Each time a flash of light crossed the glass, I caught his reflection beside mine. Two figures moving in the half-dark, closer than they should be. In the living room, the largest window refused to close properly. I gripped the frame, forcing it down while he held the other side. Our shoulders brushed, damp sleeves pressing together. Outside, the thunder cracked, shaking the glass between our hands. When it finally latched, we both exhaled at once. His hand remained on the frame a moment longer, then fell to his side. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice almost lost to the rain. I turned toward him. The light from the storm flickered across his face. Half shadow, half softness. He looked different in that gray glow. Not older, not younger, just human, tired and searching. The silence swelled again, the kind that makes every breath sound like a confession. He took a slow step closer. "You can leave if you want," he said quietly. My pulse stumbled. I should have moved, should have said something light or grateful, should have picked up my keys and walked out before the moment grew teeth. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was. The rain hit harder, filling the house with its restless rhythm. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The space between us narrowed until the sound of his breathing folded into mine. His hand lifted, hesitant, trembling, and rested against my arm. A small gesture, careful enough to undo every wall I'd built. I didn't pull away. It wasn't a sudden moment, not a rush of impulse. It was slower, like recognition, like two people realizing at the same time that they had run out of reasons to pretend. I felt the warmth of his hand through the damp fabric, the quiet steadiness of someone who had gone too long without being touched in kindness. He looked at me, not asking, not demanding, just seeing. Everything after that blurred into stillness. No words, no noise but the rain and the wind against the roof. The world outside collapsed into that small room, where time bent around a decision that could never be taken back. It wasn't lust. It wasn't the thrill of secrecy. It was the ache of two people reaching for warmth in the wrong season. And even as I leaned closer, not to cross a line, but to understand the gravity of it, I knew this wasn't supposed to happen. The storm outside broke fully then, rain slanting sideways, windows rattling. We stood together, unmoving, suspended in that fragile space between need and guilt. When the thunder rolled again, he stepped back. His hand fell away. The distance that returned was small but absolute. He ran a hand through his hair, breath uneven. "This," he started, then stopped. His voice found shape again, roughened. "This can't happen." I wanted to speak, to say I know, but the words stuck somewhere behind my ribs. He looked toward the window, avoiding my eyes. "You should go before it gets worse out there." The rain showed no sign of stopping. Still, I nodded. My throat felt tight, my chest hollow. I grabbed my bag from the couch, every movement slow, deliberate, like I was afraid of breaking something invisible. He followed me to the door but didn't reach for the handle. When I finally turned to him, the hallway light painted him in soft amber. He looked both strong and undone, a man built on discipline suddenly lost in feeling. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "You don't have to be." He gave a small, broken smile. "Maybe not now, but I will be." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just held his gaze a moment longer. The thunder cracked again, and the power flickered. Then I opened the door. The storm hit me like a wall, wind, rain, and the smell of summer breaking apart. I stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards slick under my shoes. Behind me, the door stayed open for a breath longer. I could feel his presence there. A shadow framed in the doorway, caught between wanting and restraint. Neither of us said goodbye. The rain soaked through my shirt by the time I reached the car, but I didn't rush. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from cold but from the weight of what had just passed between us. Something real, wrong, and beautiful in the same breath. Through the windshield, I could still see the faint glow of his porch light, steady against the storm. I sat there for a long minute before turning the key. Inside, I could almost picture him doing the same. Standing in that dim living room, staring at the empty space where I'd been, wondering how something so quiet could leave so much noise behind. As I drove away, the rain blurred everything. The street, the lights, the house receding in the mirror. But one thought stayed sharp. We had crossed a line that no apology could erase. And yet, beneath the guilt, something else stirred. A kind of peace, fragile but undeniable. Because for one fleeting moment, in a world built on silence, both of us had finally been seen. The rain didn't stop that night, and neither did the thoughts. For the next few days, I moved through life as if it were happening to someone else. Classes, messages, errands, all blending into a blur of motion that felt detached from meaning. I didn't text Noah. Couldn't. Every time I saw his name pop up in our group chat, my chest tightened. He sent a few lighthearted messages. Memes, photos from his internship, but I left them unanswered. It wasn't just guilt. It was the fear that even a simple "hey" might tear open something I wasn't ready to face. And I avoided his father's house like it had become part of another world. Yet, even when I tried not to think about that night, it came back in pieces. The rain against the windows, the faint smell of soil and cedar, the tremor in his voice when he said "you can leave if you want." I told myself I'd done the right thing by walking away, but I couldn't stop wondering if walking away had actually meant running. A week later, Noah called. "Hey man, long time no see." His voice was cheerful, oblivious. "Dad said you dropped by. How was he?" The question lodged in my throat. "He was good," I lied, forcing a smile into my tone. "Yeah." Noah chuckled softly. "He's been weird lately. Quiet. Keeps working in the yard like he's trying to dig to China or something." I froze. "He okay?" I asked carefully. "Probably just lonely," Noah said. "He gets like that sometimes when I'm gone. You should hang out with him again. He likes you, you know?" My pulse stumbled. I managed to mumble something vague about being busy, then changed the subject. But his words followed me long after the call ended. "He likes you." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the memory of the storm replaying on a loop. Guilt was a strange thing. It didn't shout. It whispered, soft and persistent, until you couldn't tell if what you felt was remorse or longing. A few days later, it happened. The kind of coincidence you can't prepare for. I was at the grocery store, half awake, pushing a cart filled with things I didn't really need. Coffee, cereal, the illusion of normalcy. I turned the corner by the produce section and stopped short. Mr. Callahan stood by the fruit display, reading the label on a carton of strawberries. He looked the same, worn, grounded, calm, but there was something quieter about him, like the storm had never really left. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world kept spinning around us. The hum of freezers, the chatter of other shoppers, but everything else blurred. He noticed me, froze, then offered a small, uncertain smile. Hey, hey. It was a word that used to mean nothing, but now carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. We stood there in the awkward middle of the aisle, both pretending to search for words that didn't exist. Finally, he spoke. Do you have a minute? I nodded. He placed the carton back on the shelf and led the way outside. The air was bright but cool, the storm finally gone. We stopped near the carts under the awning, away from the noise of the automatic doors. For a moment, he just looked at me. Really looked, the way he had that night. His eyes were tired but gentle. I wasn't sure if I'd see you again, he said quietly. I wasn't sure I should. He nodded, understanding. I figured. I've been thinking a lot about that night. So have I. The wind rustled through the plastic bags in the return rack. He ran a hand over the back of his neck. I want to say something, not to fix it, just to be honest. I waited. What happened? He said slowly. Wasn't a mistake, but it's not something either of us can hold on to. The words hit harder than I expected, not cruelly, just true. I know, I said. I keep trying to decide how to feel about it. He tilted his head. And I took a long breath. Part of me felt used. He flinched slightly. Not from anger, but from the sting of recognition. And another part? He asked. I met his eyes. Felt loved. He exhaled. A sound somewhere between relief and pain. Then maybe it was both. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The cars passing by filled the silence with their low hum, grounding the moment in reality again. He looked down at his hands. I miss talking to you, he said softly. Not the yard work, not the awkward small talk, just the company. I swallowed. I miss it too. When I said it, I realized how true it was. For all the confusion, the guilt, the silence that followed, what I missed most wasn't the heat of the moment. It was the quiet understanding we'd found in between. He took a step closer, eyes still gentle. We can't go back there, he said. But I don't want to erase it either. I nodded. Neither do I. There was nothing else to say. The air between us was heavy with the kind of honesty that doesn't need translation. Then, slowly, he reached out, a hesitant motion, careful as if asking permission. I didn't move. When his arms went around me, it wasn't a pull. It was a question. I answered by leaning in. The hug was brief but full, the kind that feels like a heartbeat and a confession in the same breath. His hand pressed lightly against my back, and in that quiet moment I could feel everything he didn't say. The apology, the gratitude, the ache. When he pulled away, his eyes were glassy but steady. We'll find a way to remember it kindly, he said. It was the perfect sentence, not too much, not too little. Just enough to turn pain into something almost gentle. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, kindly. He gave a faint, weary smile, the kind that meant goodbye without saying it. Then he stepped back, slipped his hands into his pockets, and walked toward his truck. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded into the traffic. The sky was clear again, washed clean, the sunlight glinting off puddles like fragments of something once broken. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crushed by guilt. Just quiet, honest, changed. Some truths, I realized, don't have to be spoken to be forgiven. By the time summer bled into September, the air had changed. The days were still bright, but the light felt thinner, quieter. The world was moving on, and so was I. My room was half-packed. Boxes stacked in uneven towers, clothes folded with the kind of care you only give when you know you're leaving. The walls looked bare without the posters, and the floor creaked in places I'd forgotten. College was 2 days away. A new city, new roommates, a new version of myself waiting somewhere I couldn't quite picture. But there was one thing I hadn't done yet, one place that felt unfinished. I told myself I was only going to say goodbye. Nothing more. The afternoon was warm, the kind of weather that tries to convince you the season hasn't turned yet. As I drove, the roads looked exactly the same gas station, the same cracked sign at the intersection, the same house at the end of the cul-de-sac where everything had changed. The Callahan's yard was neater now. The grass trimmed, the garden alive again, roses blooming along the fence line. It looked like a place that had been tended to, cared for. I parked at the curb and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to start the engine again, drive until the feeling passed. But another part, the braver, quieter part, told me I owed this moment to both of us. I got out. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and late summer rain. The wind carried the sound of a sprinkler somewhere nearby, and for a second it felt like nothing had changed at all. Then the door opened. Mr. Callahan stood there, just as he had that first day. Sleeves rolled, a faint smudge of dirt on his forearm. But time had touched him too. His hair was a little grayer at the temples, his eyes softer. He blinked, surprised at first, then smiled warm but measured. "Well, look who it is." "Hey," I said, suddenly unsure how to stand, how to breathe. He leaned against the doorframe. "Heading off soon?" "Tomorrow." He nodded. College boy now. His tone was light, but something deeper ran beneath it. Pride, maybe, or memory. "You want to come in?" I hesitated, then followed him inside. The house looked almost the same, maybe a little emptier, like the air had learned how to hold silence without breaking it. Family photos still lined the wall, though a few frames were missing. The wedding photo was gone. In the living room, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the floor in gold. He set 2 glasses of water on the coffee table and sat down. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said. "I almost didn't." He smiled faintly. "I get that." We sat for a while, talking about nothing important. Dorm supplies, new classes, his work. Every word felt like we were testing the ground before stepping forward. Then the conversation thinned, leaving only the truth we'd both come to face. He looked at me. Not searching, not questioning, just steady. "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Better, I think." "Good." He nodded slowly. I wasn't sure I deserved to ask. I met his eyes. "You do." The silence after that felt different. Not heavy like before, but clean. Time had done what time does best. It softened the edges without erasing the shape. He exhaled and leaned back, gaze drifting toward the window. "I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. About life, about what we hold on to and what we let go." He paused. "Sometimes love shows up in the wrong order." I looked up. He gave a small, almost wistful smile. "But it still teaches you something, right?" The words sank into the quiet like stones into water. I wanted to tell him that I'd learned that lesson too. That love wasn't always about timing or permission. Sometimes it was just about recognition. 2 souls crossing paths, even for a moment, to remind each other they were still alive. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, it does." He nodded, then rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You know, for a while I thought what happened was something to regret. But now, I think it just reminded me that I'm still capable of feeling." There was no guilt in his tone anymore, just peace. And hearing it gave me some of my own. "I used to replay that night," I admitted, trying to decide if it ruined something or fixed something. "I still don't know." He smiled gently. "Maybe it did a bit of both." We laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it felt right to let the tension go that way. He studied me a moment longer. "You've changed," he said. "More grounded. Guess I had to grow up fast." He nodded approvingly. "You did." The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. I realized then that this was our last conversation. Not because anyone said so, but because we both knew it. Some chapters end quietly. No slamming doors, No dramatic goodbyes, just the calm certainty that it's time. He stood first. You should probably get going before it gets dark. I rose too, hands in my pockets. Yeah. We walked to the door together. The same hallway, the same floorboards, the same air, and yet everything different. At the threshold, I turned to him. Thank you. For everything. He shook his head. No. Thank you. You showed up when I didn't know I needed anyone. The moment lingered. There was no touch this time, no unspoken invitation. Just two people standing close enough to feel the weight of what they'd shared and the distance that now made it bearable. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world went still. Then he smiled, small, sincere, final. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. I stepped out into the sunlight. The wind lifted the edge of my shirt, carrying the faint scent of soil and summer. As I walked down the driveway, I heard the door close behind me. Not sharply, but gently, like someone closing a book they loved but had finally finished. The road shimmered ahead in the late afternoon heat. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The memory of him, of that house, that storm, that quiet, was already stitched into me. Some part of me knew we'd both go on pretending it was a secret, but not because we were ashamed, because some truths live better in silence. I reached the car and leaned against the door, letting the sun warm my face. The air hummed with cicadas, life going on as if nothing monumental had happened, and maybe that was the point. I thought about everything he'd said, and everything he hadn't. About the strange ways people save each other without meaning to. About how sometimes, even the forbidden can leave behind something tender. And in that quiet, final moment of summer, I understood something I hadn't before. He taught me that desire doesn't always mean sin. Sometimes it's a mirror. We were both just trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted. I opened my eyes to the sky, clear, blue, infinite. Then I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. The road curved gently out of the neighborhood, sunlight flashing through the trees, and the house disappeared behind me, leaving only the memory of a man, a summer, and a silence that would echo for years to come. If the story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, was it love or just timing?